Picture this. Someone sells a tank for less than the price of a used car, or builds a highway that cracks in half after a year. Sounds wild, right? Well, that's just the beginning. Today, we're going to dive into 101 jaw-dropping facts about corruption you won't believe actually happened. 1. Did you know that one senator literally got busted for keeping cash bribes in his freezer? Louisiana Senator William Jefferson was caught with $90,000 stuffed in frozen food containers. Forget stocks or real estate. Apparently, frozen assets are the future. 2. In the 1860s, politicians in New York City created the Tweed Ring, a group so corrupt they stole millions from taxpayers. How? They inflated construction costs, including charging $1,000 per broom for cleaning government buildings. $1,000 for a broom. At that price, it better sweep away my student loans too. 3. During Prohibition, Chicago Mayor William Hale Thompson accepted bribes from bootleggers, gangsters, and basically anyone with a checkbook. Thompson even declared he'd punch the King of England if given the chance. I guess he was trying to distract us from the whole working with Al Capone thing. 4. In the 1970s, the FBI set up an elaborate sting operation called Abscom. They posed as wealthy Arab sheikhs offering bribes to politicians. Shockingly, several lawmakers enthusiastically accepted. One congressman even asked, "Does it have to be cash?" I guess Venmo wasn't an option back then. 5. The 1980s saw the infamous savings and loan scandal, where deregulated banks lost billions of taxpayer dollars. One culprit, Charles Keating, even paid off 5 senators to lobby for him. These senators became known as the Keating Five, proving that teamwork really does make the dream work, at least when it comes to fraud. 6. Let's not forget the Teapot Dome scandal of the 1920s. This oil lease bribery scandal involved Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall, who secretly leased federal oil reserves to private companies in exchange for, well, a small fortune. He was the first cabinet member to go to prison, setting the gold standard for government scandals. 7. In the early 2000s, lobbyist Jack Abramoff was at the center of a massive corruption scheme involving bribery, fraud, and extravagant trips for politicians. He even charged one Native American tribe over $85 million in lobbying fees. Talk about taking cultural exploitation to a whole new level. 8. In 2011, Bell, California, officials were caught paying themselves outrageously high salaries, with the city manager earning nearly $800,000 a year. Their excuse? They claimed they deserved it because the job was stressful. Maybe the stress came from all the illegal payouts. 9. During the Cold War, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, kept dirt files on political figures to maintain power. He didn't just fight crime, he collected blackmail. Hoover's files were so extensive, they could make TMZ blush. 10. In 1876, Congress was so divided over the presidential election that they literally sold the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes. A backroom deal promised to end Reconstruction in exchange for the White House. Democracy in action, or just another cash-for-votes scheme? 11. In the 1950s, Oklahoma Governor David Hall got himself tangled in a bribery scheme involving shady insurance deals. When caught, he famously claimed he was framed by a conspiracy of sore losers. Spoiler alert, the jury didn't buy it, and he became the first Oklahoma governor to serve prison time. 12. In 2008, Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich was caught on tape trying to sell Barack Obama's vacated Senate seat. His exact words? "I've got this thing, and it's expletive golden." Turns out he was right, golden handcuffs. 13. Let's talk about the whiskey ring of the 1870s. A group of government officials conspired with distillers to avoid paying liquor taxes, pocketing millions in the process. When caught, they tried to bribe their way out of the scandal, because of course that's the most logical solution. 14. During the Gilded Age, railroad tycoon Leland Stanford bribed lawmakers to secure land grants for his company. Ironically, Stanford University, named after him, is now a hub for teaching ethics. Oh, the sweet taste of irony. 15. The 1920s saw New York City Mayor Jimmy Walker accused of accepting kickbacks from contractors, gambling dens, and speakeasies. When asked about his luxurious lifestyle, he quipped, "I don't make a lot of money, but I spend a lot." Honesty, at least. 16. In the early 1900s, Tammany Hall boss Richard Croker was accused of using public funds to build a lavish horse stable. He justified it by saying, "The horses are part of city business." Apparently, municipal horses needed chandeliers. 17. In the 1990s, California Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham created an actual bribery menu. Yes, you heard that right. He listed out how much donors needed to pay for favors. Want a government contract? That'll be $500,000. A military deal? $2.4 million. At least he was upfront about his fees. 18. The Pentagon's $600 toilet seat became infamous in the 1980s as part of a massive defense budget scandal. Turns out, most of that money was being funneled into secretive projects and private bank accounts. Imagine flushing taxpayer dollars. Literally. 19. New Jersey's 2002 mayoral election in Camden saw one candidate arrested mid-campaign for stealing campaign funds. Even better? He tried to campaign from jail. Spoiler, he didn't win, but you've got to respect the hustle. 20. And let's not forget the epic bribery of the 1939 New York World's Fair. Contractors bribed officials for lucrative deals, leading to one official owning a yacht named the Misappropriation. Points for transparency, I guess. 21. In the 1960s, Bobby Baker, a top aide to Lyndon B. Johnson, was caught running a side hustle involving kickbacks, shady deals, and even a private nightclub for Washington elites. It was described as a scandalous mixture of politics, money, and, well, cocktails. 22. Alaska Senator Ted Stevens became famous in the 2000s for accepting home renovations worth over $250,000 from an oil company in exchange for political favors. His defense? He claimed he didn't notice the upgrades. Because who wouldn't overlook a brand new jacuzzi and a 2-story deck? 23. The credit mobilier scandal of the 1870s saw Congress members being bribed with shares of a fake construction company. In return, they approved massive government contracts for the Union Pacific Railroad. When exposed, many just shrugged, because apparently that's how business was done back then. 24. In the 1990s, a judge in Pennsylvania was found guilty of accepting bribes from juvenile detention centers. His job? Sending more kids to jail to fill their quotas. They called it the Kids for Cash scandal. If you weren't already cynical, you're welcome. 25. During the early 1900s, corrupt labor leader George Scalise was caught siphoning money from union funds to pay for lavish parties, expensive cars, and even a private zoo. Because apparently, nothing says working-class hero like owning a tiger. 26. Chicago's infamous Democratic machine was so entrenched in the mid-20th century that one election saw more votes cast than there were residents in the city. Ghosts aren't just spooky. They're also surprisingly politically active. 27. In 1932, a group of corrupt customs officials in San Francisco was caught smuggling alcohol during Prohibition. Their method? Hiding booze in coffins? Because nothing screams low profile like a hearse full of moonshine. 28. A 2014 investigation revealed that New York prison guards were accepting bribes to smuggle contraband into facilities. Items included cell phones, drugs, and, oddly enough, steak dinners. Apparently, even criminals have gourmet tastes. 29. Florida's Opa-locka city officials were so corrupt in the 2010s that the FBI nicknamed it Corruption City. Among other crimes, they were caught demanding bribes from residents just to turn their water back on. Basic utilities? Only if you pay the fee. 30. In the late 1800s, Congressman Oakes Ames handed out stock in his railroad company to bribe colleagues into passing favorable legislation. When exposed, his defense was that everyone else was doing it too. Classic schoolyard logic, just with millions of dollars on the line. 31. In the 1980s, New Orleans Judge Alan Green was caught accepting bribes to fix court cases. One of his payments was a lifetime supply of fried chicken. Who needs cash when you can have endless drumsticks? 32. Boston's Big Dig, a massive highway project started in the 1990s became a corruption goldmine. Over $14 billion was spent. Much of it wasted on overpriced contracts, faulty materials, and a tunnel that started leaking as soon as it opened. You'd think for that price it'd at least stay dry. 33. In the 1950s, the IRS was rocked by a scandal involving its own agents. Dozens of officials were caught accepting bribes to erase people's tax debts. Nothing like solving your money problems with some good old-fashioned graft. 34. In the early 2010s, a city council member in California used public funds to hire a pet psychic for the city's official mascot, a pot-bellied pig named Wilbur. Apparently, Wilbur was having existential anxieties about his role in local government. Taxpayers, however, were less concerned with Wilbur's inner turmoil and more with the $10,000 bill for pig therapy. 35. A small-town mayor in Pennsylvania, an avid fan of competitive eating, used city funds to host an annual hot dog eating contest, claiming it would boost tourism and local businesses. However, it turned out the mayor was also the owner of the local hot dog factory, and the contest conveniently coincided with the launch of his new Mayor's Choice hot dog brand. The only thing bigger than the contestants' appetites was the mayor's conflict of interest. 36. In the 1990s, Arizona Governor Fife Symington was convicted of extortion and bank fraud. His excuse? He said he didn't understand accounting. Unfortunately for him, ignorance isn't a legal defense, especially when you're handling millions. 37. During World War II, several companies bribed officials to get lucrative military contracts. One factory was caught delivering boots made of cardboard to the troops. Supporting the war effort? Sure, supporting soldiers' feet. Not so much. 38. A county commissioner in Florida, a self-proclaimed vampire enthusiast, used taxpayer money to install bat-friendly lighting throughout the county courthouse. He argued it was an eco-friendly initiative, but critics suspected it was more about creating the perfect ambiance for his late-night meetings. Turns out, draining the public coffers is more effective than draining blood. 39. In the 1930s, Louisiana Governor Huey Long famously used state funds to pay for his personal campaign expenses. He justified it by saying, "Every man a king." Apparently, he thought he was king of the treasury. 40. Let's not forget the New York Police Department's infamous PAD system in the early 20th century. Officers collected bribes from local businesses and criminals in exchange for protection. It wasn't just corruption, it was a subscription service. 41. In the late 1800s, the U.S. government was embroiled in the Star Route scandal, where officials conspired with postal contractors to inflate delivery costs. The scheme siphoned millions from taxpayers, and when it was exposed, one senator described it as a new level of creative theft. Even the mail wasn't safe. 42. The 1930s saw a bizarre scheme in Kansas where state officials were caught forcing teachers to donate part of their salaries to political campaigns. Refuse, and you could kiss your job goodbye. Apparently, teaching the next generation wasn't considered contribution enough. 43. In the 1980s, Operation Greylord exposed widespread corruption in Chicago's judicial system. Judges, lawyers, and clerks were caught taking bribes to fix cases. One judge even set a fixed rate for acquittals, $10,000 per felony. Justice might be blind, but in Chicago, it wasn't cheap. 44. During the Cold War, the Pentagon was found paying $7,600 for a single coffee maker. When questioned, officials claimed it was part of a classified program. Classified as what? A lesson in how not to manage a budget? 45. The 2010s brought us the Flint water crisis, where government officials knowingly switched the city's water source to save money, despite warnings it would lead to dangerous contamination. Corruption here wasn't about bribes, it was about putting dollars over lives. The result? A public health disaster. 46. In 1972, Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned after it was revealed he'd been taking bribes while serving as governor of Maryland. These weren't sophisticated deals either. He was literally handed envelopes stuffed with cash in his office. Subtlety clearly wasn't his strong suit. 47. The 1990s saw the bizarre case of New York City tax assessors who rigged property valuations in exchange for kickbacks. One wealthy client had their multi-million-dollar mansion valued as if it were a shack. If only everyone could get those kinds of discounts. 48. Back in the early 1900s, Montana copper baron William A. Clark openly bribed state legislators to secure a U.S. Senate seat. When caught, he shrugged and said, "I never bought a man who wasn't for sale." If honesty is the best policy, at least he stuck to it. 49. In 2009, lobbyist Kevin Ring was convicted for bribing public officials with luxury sports tickets, expensive meals, and spa treatments. His defense? He claimed he was just being generous. The jury wasn't convinced, and neither were the taxpayers footing the bill. 50. And then there's the New York subway scandal of the 1950s. Corrupt officials awarded inflated contracts to companies that use substandard materials. The result? Trains that broke down constantly, and stations that flooded whenever it rained. You'd think they were trying to invent underwater commuting. 51. In the mid-2000s, a mayor in Arizona, convinced he was the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, used city funds to build a scale replica of the Sphinx in his backyard. He claimed it was a cultural landmark, but residents saw it as a monument to his ego and their depleted tax dollars. Apparently, some legacies are built on sand and embezzlement. 52. The 1989 HUD scandal revealed that officials at the Department of Housing and Urban Development were awarding contracts to developers who offered the biggest bribes. Millions meant for low-income housing ended up lining the pockets of lobbyists and cronies. Because who needs affordable housing when you can have a yacht? 53. In 1949, Carmine DeSapio, leader of New York's Tammany Hall, used his power to funnel public contracts to his allies. One project included a bridge to nowhere that led to a private resort. Taxpayer-funded exclusivity? Anyone? 54. In the early 2000s, the city of Detroit saw a major scandal involving Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. He used public funds to throw extravagant parties, buy luxury cars, and even secretly settle a whistleblower lawsuit. His downfall included text messages exposing it all. Pro tip: never leave a paper or digital trail. 55. The Gilded Age was rife with corruption, but none as odd as the diamond necklace scandal of 1883. Politicians accepted bribes in the form of extravagant jewelry. One senator's wife was even spotted wearing her bribe at a public ball. Subtlety was clearly not in fashion. 56. In the 1930s, Louisiana politician Earl Long, brother of Huey Long, was known for using state funds for, let's say, personal entertainment. He once bought a racehorse using taxpayer money, naming it Louisiana. At least he gave the people some representation on the track. 57. The Bridgegate scandal of 2013 involved New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's aides orchestrating a traffic jam on the George Washington Bridge as political payback. Thousands of commuters were stuck for hours, all because someone didn't endorse Christie. Nothing says petty like weaponized gridlock. 58. In the late 1800s, politicians in San Francisco were caught inflating the city's budget by adding fake employees to the payroll. These phantom workers included non-existent street sweepers, who somehow earned more than real ones. The ghosts of corruption strike again. 59. The 1980s. Savings and loan crisis wasn't just a financial disaster. It was a corruption playground. Executives at banks like Lincoln Savings and Loan used depositors' money to fund lavish lifestyles, including private jets and gold-plated furniture. When it all collapsed, taxpayers footed the $124 billion bill. 60. In the 1920s, Chicago gangster Al Capone managed to bribe his way into controlling not just illegal liquor, but also the city's police force. At one point, nearly half of Chicago's officers were on his payroll. Crime didn't just pay, it gave you a badge. 61. In the late 2010s, a school superintendent in Ohio used district funds to purchase a fleet of Segways for school administrators. He argued they were essential for efficient campus patrols, but critics suspected they were more for joyrides. The scandal became known as Segway Gate, proving that sometimes the wheels of justice roll rather slowly. 62. A mayor in Nevada, obsessed with conspiracy theories, used city funds to build a giant underground bunker stocked with freeze-dried food and survival gear. He claimed it was a disaster preparedness initiative, but it looked suspiciously like a doomsday prepper's paradise. Ironically, his downfall wasn't a natural disaster, but an audit revealing his misuse of funds. Turns out, the only apocalypse he needed to worry about was the one in his bank account. 63. In the 1990s, Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards was convicted for extorting millions from casino owners in exchange for operating licenses. His response? He joked that the only way he'd lose an election was if I got caught in bed with a dead girl or a live boy. Turns out, it was the millions in bribes that did him in. 64. In the 1940s, the Kansas City Mafia infiltrated local government so thoroughly that officials began holding city council meetings in mob-owned nightclubs. Decisions made over martinis and jazz music? What could possibly go wrong? 65. The 2005 CoinGate scandal in Ohio involved state funds being invested in rare coins by a politically connected dealer. When the coins went missing, the scheme was exposed, revealing millions of dollars in losses. Who knew corruption could be so shiny? 66. In the 1870s, the Brooklyn Bridge construction project was riddled with graft. Officials accepted bribes from contractors who used subpar materials, leading to delays and increased costs. The bridge still stands, but it's a wonder it didn't collapse under the weight of all the corruption. 67. In the early 1900s, the Sugar Trust scandal saw customs officials accepting bribes to underweigh sugar imports, cheating the government out of millions in taxes. Sweet, sweet corruption. 68. A 2014 scandal in Los Angeles revealed that city officials had used millions in public funds to redecorate their offices. The highlight? A $20,000 rug made from exotic animal hides. Apparently, regular carpets just weren't official enough. 69. The 1990s brought us the check-kiting scandal of Congressman Dan Rostenkowski. He used a taxpayer-funded house bank to cash personal checks he couldn't cover. His excuse? He didn't realize it was illegal. Ignorance may be bliss, but it's not a great legal defense. 70. In 1987, a Tennessee judge was caught taking bribes from criminal defendants in exchange for reduced sentences. His system was so organized that he kept a detailed ledger of every payment. Turns out, even corruption benefits from good bookkeeping. 71. In the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration, WPA, was supposed to create jobs during the Great Depression, but in some areas, it became a hotbed of corruption. Supervisors inflated payrolls with fake employees, many of whom had suspiciously familiar last names. Turns out, nepotism ran just as deep as unemployment. 72. A city council member in Oregon, a self-proclaimed owl whisperer, used public funds to create a sanctuary for owls in the city hall attic. He claimed it would bring good luck, but the only thing it brought was a swarm of rodents and an investigation into his spending. Apparently, wisdom doesn't always come with financial responsibility. 73. In the early 2020s, a mayor in Colorado used city funds to commission a life-size statue of himself, made entirely of Peeps marshmallows. He claimed it was a pop art masterpiece, but critics saw it as a sticky testament to his self-importance. 74. In the early 2020s, a school superintendent in California diverted funds meant for school supplies to purchase a collection of vintage lunchboxes, claiming they were educational artifacts. The collection, which included rare Superman and Star Wars lunchboxes, was discovered in his office, not in a museum, leading to his resignation and a lot of hungry students. 75. In the 2010s, a scandal erupted in Philadelphia when it came to light that a state education official had misspent millions on an innovative learning program. This program, inexplicably, involved purchasing over 1,000 tablets for a single classroom of just 20 students. Apparently in Philly, Each student needed 50 tablets to succeed, while the rest likely went to meet the officials' own educational needs. 76. In the 1980s, the EPA was caught redirecting Superfund money, intended for toxic waste cleanup, to politically connected contractors who did little to no actual work. One official joked that they should rename it the Superfund Fund. Taxpayers didn't find it as amusing. 77. During Prohibition, the U.S. Coast Guard was supposed to stop alcohol smuggling, but some officers turned it into a lucrative side hustle. They confiscated liquor from smugglers, only to sell it back to bootleggers. Talk about a never-ending supply chain. 78. The Alaska Bridge to Nowhere scandal of the 2000s involved $223 million in federal funds allocated to build a bridge connecting an island with 50 residents to the mainland. After public outrage, the project was canceled, but the funds mysteriously disappeared. Perhaps the money found its own nowhere. 79. The New Jersey Turnpike Authority made headlines in 2003 for wasting $5 million on employee perks, including expensive catered parties and massages. Drivers toll money hard at work, keeping government employees relaxed and well-fed. 80. In the 1920s, Warren G. Harding's presidency was marred by the Veterans Bureau scandal. Officials embezzled millions meant for veterans' health care. The head of the bureau, Charles Forbes, even sold government hospital supplies at a profit, leaving veterans to fend for themselves. Truly a low point in public service. 81. In the 1970s, the Watergate scandal rocked the U.S. government. But what's often overlooked is how the Nixon administration used government agencies to sabotage political opponents. The famous break-in? It wasn't the only dirty trick. They even had plans to plant false news stories about their rivals. It's like a political reality show, but with way more serious consequences. 82. In the early 20th century, the U.S. Postal Service was at the center of a massive scandal known as the Postal Scandal of 1912. High-ranking postal officials were caught accepting bribes from private contractors, allowing them to overcharge for shipping rates. At least when you're stealing from the public, you know it's going to be delivered. 83. In the mid-2010s, a solar panel scandal rocked a southwestern state. A state representative championing green energy initiatives pushed through legislation offering massive tax breaks for homeowners who installed solar panels. It was later revealed that the representative owned a significant stake in the state's largest solar panel installation company, resulting in a windfall of profits for himself and his associates while draining the state's coffers. The scandal led to new ethics regulations and a tarnished reputation for renewable energy programs in the state. 84. The 1950s saw a unique twist on corruption in the form of the Great Bribery Scandal of Hollywood. Actors, directors, and studio heads were found guilty of bribing politicians to secure favorable zoning laws and tax exemptions. A bribe here and there to get your movie studio approved. What's the harm in that? 85. In the 1990s, the U.S. military was caught in a scandal involving the sale of surplus military equipment to private contractors. This wasn't just any equipment, we're talking everything from tanks to fighter jets, at ridiculously low prices. If you knew the right people, you could stock up on military hardware cheaper than a used car. 86. The 1980s saw a massive public works corruption case in Miami, where officials took bribes from construction companies to approve shoddy projects. One highway was even built so poorly that it literally cracked in half after a year. One can only assume that taxpayers were paying for the cracks, too. 87. The 1997 political scandal in New York, known as the Whitewater Affair, centered around a failed real estate investment by the Clintons, but the corruption accusations went far beyond that. It involved cover-ups, shady loans, and the mysterious disappearance of documents. Sometimes it's not just what you do, but what you hide that gets you into trouble. 88. In the 1930s, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York was caught in a scandal where a group of influential bankers colluded with foreign governments to manipulate the price of gold. The public never caught wind of the full extent, but some suspect the amount of gold was never properly accounted for, leaving taxpayers on the losing end. 89. The infamous Payola scandal, of the 1950s revealed that popular radio stations and DJs were accepting bribes from record labels in exchange for playing certain songs. This had a huge impact on the music industry, but one has to wonder, did the public ever realize they were essentially paying to hear the same 10 songs over and over? 90. In the 1990s, a massive fraud scheme in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development involved the illegal transfer of billions in taxpayer dollars to low-income housing developers who pocketed the money without ever building a single structure. The scandal was so big that it became a blueprint for how to not handle federal funds. 91. In the 1980s, the billion-dollar bank scandal involved officials at the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, helping drug lords, arms dealers, and corrupt politicians launder money. The bank was eventually shut down, but not before it had funneled billions through the financial system. A criminal empire masquerading as a legitimate bank. Now that's irony. 92. A state senator in Texas, an avid collector of Beanie Babies, used campaign funds to purchase a rare Princess Diana bear, believing it would be a valuable investment. It wasn't. He lost the election, and the bear, now worth about $3, became a permanent fixture on his office shelf, a fluffy reminder of his poor financial and political judgment. 93. In the 1940s, a scandal known as the Aldrich-Vreeland Act allowed a select group of bankers to control the flow of currency during World War I. The result? These bankers were able to manipulate the economy for their own personal gain, causing inflation and financial hardship for millions of Americans. Some call it the beginning of modern financial oligarchy. Others just call it a nightmare. 94. In the 2000s, a widespread corruption case in the federal government involved contractors overcharging the Department of Defense for basic supplies, like uniforms and food. The biggest surprise? Some contractors were charging more for a box of cookies than what you'd pay for an entire military meal. Sweet deal for them, not so sweet for taxpayers. 95. In 1963, the Chicago 7 conspiracy trial, while famous for its civil rights undertones, also uncovered corruption within the city's political system. It was revealed that key officials had taken bribes to rig trials in favor of certain defendants. At one point, it was speculated that the city's entire legal system was being run by the mob. Talk about a justice system you don't want to get caught in. 96. The 1990s Enron scandal wasn't just a corporate failure. It was a massive case of accounting fraud at the highest levels. Company executives inflated profits, hid debt, and encouraged employees to invest their life savings in company stock, all while secretly bankrupting the company. The biggest scam? Convincing the world they were a top-tier energy company while being nothing more than a Ponzi scheme in disguise. 97. In the 1920s, a group of Wall Street bankers pulled off one of the most audacious insider trading schemes ever, involving massive manipulation of stock prices. Their plan? To rig the stock market, manipulate interest rates, and make millions of dollars from the people's losses. When exposed, it sent shockwaves through the financial world, but the perpetrators walked free, leaving the public to foot the bill for their massive losses. 98. The 1970s saw an infamous scandal involving the sale of U.S. military technology to foreign governments by corrupt defense contractors. This deal allowed foreign military forces to buy advanced American weaponry at a steep discount, often with no questions asked. It was all about making a profit, even if it meant arming your country's enemies. 99. In 1969, the Bureau of Indian Affairs scandal revealed that federal officials were pocketing millions of dollars intended for Native American tribes. The funds were supposed to go toward education and welfare programs, but instead, officials embezzled the money, leaving many tribes without basic services. It was a classic case of a system meant to help being hijacked for personal gain. 100. In the late 2000s, a governor in New Mexico used state funds to create a state-of-the-art dog park, complete with a doggy spa, a gourmet dog food buffet, and a miniature golf course. He justified it as boosting tourism, but critics argued it was more about pampering his prize-winning poodle. Apparently, some politicians believe in rolling over for their furry friends and taxpayer dollars. 101. The 1950s Cultural Revolution scandal involved the U.S. State Department secretly funding and controlling cultural exchange programs to promote a political agenda during the Cold War. The government used American artists, writers, and musicians to subtly promote propaganda, while portraying the U.S. as the beacon of freedom and democracy. Who knew that art was the perfect cover for political maneuvering? Well, there you have it. 101 unbelievable stories of corruption that shaped American history. From jaw-dropping scandals to absurd misuse of power, it makes you wonder, which of these shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about history and corruption.